Look, I want to just start today on a more somber note. I recognize that there were these mass shootings in New Zealand, and that 49 people were killed at least. There are no information about threats in Montgomery County, but we're going to increase police presence at mosques for Friday prayers. And next week I'll be announcing $200,000 of security grants to faith-based organizations in the county. We were going to do that anyway, but I wanted to make sure people understood that we understand that there are these kind of threats, and we're going to do what we can to address them. I want to welcome everyone. I want to acknowledge the Board of Education. Is Shebra here? Anybody else here from the Board of Education? Yes. Where? Dr. Johnson. Okay. And Dr. Smith's not here today. He told me he wasn't going to be here. Dr. Pollard's here from Montgomery College. Casey Anderson's here from Park and Planning. I want to recognize all of our department heads and budget staff, and I want to really express my heartfelt thanks to them and everybody else who's worked on the budget. I came into this process mid-year, and so budget processes were already rolling when I got here. Union negotiations were already going on when I got here, and so I wasn't able to either fully put my fingerprint on everything that I would have liked, and that's what would be nice about this year is we'll actually get an early start on everything. But I want to say my staff did an amazing job because we dealt with my second day in office dragging me into a meeting I didn't plan at 4 o'clock and telling me I had to cut $44 million out of the budget because last year's reconciliation was off a tad. And that was a pretty big mid-year adjustment. And then a couple of weeks later, we were doing the off-year CIP, which is normally we noodle around a couple of $1 million here and there and everything's fine, and I had to make $100 million or so in adjustments to what was supposed to be a simple CIP. And then a couple of weeks ago, the state decided that we had to write down $80 million in revenues, 40-something for this year and the same for next year, and we thought we had a difficult gap, but we were making progress on it, and in one little note from the state, they doubled the gap we were working with, and that's really hard to deal with at the last minute in a budget. Finding $80 million just doesn't fall out of the air like I would wish it were. And so our staff has worked really hard having to kind of deal with multiple ongoing changing environment at the same time trying to sit down and put together a budget for the coming year. And so I think I want to just thank them for what I think is an extraordinary effort to get this right and to put all the time that people put into it. And I want to thank Rich for ordering pizza for people last night. I understand who were working late on all this. And I just can't thank you all enough. And it gives me confidence going into this coming year that I've got the kind of dedicated staff that's going to make it possible for us to do even better going forward than we've been able to do in this budget. And I just met, I guess an hour, I don't know, it was an hour, 2 hours ago, I'm losing track of time, 2 hours ago with Nancy Navarro and my colleagues on the county council to give them a briefing on the budget. So now it's time for the general briefing on the budget. So I'm just going to take my time and go through the things I want to let you know about. First, the primary focus of this budget is to try to lay the basis for sustainability going forward. In recent years, we've experienced extraordinary volatility in income taxes, pretty much in the taxes attributable to capital gains. And our takeaway from this is we've got to think differently about budgeting. You can no longer just take a really good year and say we're going to project this year forward, because 2 years ago capital gains tanked by $60 million. This year it looks like they may have tanked by $30 million. Thank you, Donald Trump. And it's hard to make plans when you don't know what your base revenues are going to be or what your baseline is going to be. So we're going to have to take into account that you have to come in somewhere below the maximum number of your tax revenues and have some money put aside so you can handle the volatility in tax revenues. So that's one of the things that we're going to be baking in to future budgets, is to give us the ability to deal with these kind of swings. When I was on the city council in Tacoma Park, we dealt with those swings by raising taxes. In a small city, you can imagine, if I lost a trash truck, which was about $100,000 back then, that was like a several cent tax increase that we had to impose on people because we didn't have the ability to absorb that all at once. So we need not to be in that situation here. We've also had a pattern of mid-year savings plans, except mid-year is not exactly accurate because we did saving plans 1 month after we passed the budget. And so our budgets, very often were never what we told people they were going to be when we introduced them, and they weren't what we told people they were going to be when we passed them. And within a very short time, we're telling departments to make cuts, and you can't spend the money we gave you, and don't expect, full funding for everything. And we want to get away from that. We don't want to have to make mid-year adjustments, and I certainly don't want to submit a budget knowing that I'm going to have to make mid-year adjustments, and that's one of the problems with other budgets. We knew on day one, even as we were working on it, these budgets were not going to make it through the year. And I would rather produce a more politically challenged budget that's honest than a budget which promises everybody everything and then promptly starts taking the money back as soon as we get into the year. That does not work, and it's not a sustainable practice, and we don't want to continue to do that. We don't want to do short-term fixes. We don't want to be diving into our fund balances, and we want budgets to reflect true costs of programs. And the classic example in this county, among other things, is fire department overtime, where we knew day one we were never going to meet those overtime numbers, so we didn't have adequate staffing. And that number would eventually lead to a decision to dip into the reserves to fund what we knew we were all going to fund. And oh, by the way, the basis of that number was based on salary data that wasn't even accurate. We weren't even using the actual pay scale for the people who were working here to calculate the overtime, thereby guaranteeing even if you guessed right on the hours, you're going to be wrong on the amount anyway. So we're trying to get away from those kind of mistakes, because it really makes sustainability difficult, and it makes it hard to keep our promises, and the volatility in the economy in general makes it hard to keep promises anyway. We don't need to be contributing to the difficulty of doing what we say we're going to do. There are a couple of things our budget does absolutely do, which I'm really happy about. One is we hit the reserve level. We are going to be at 10% reserves. So we're done with these year-over-year heavy lifts to try to get there. And this year's lift was, what, 100 and some million to get there. But we're there. So we're there on the year we told the agencies we'd be there. That money some of that money will be available for programming after this year. Some of it's going to go to the Wynn lawsuit that I think a lot of people know we have to start paying back money that the county got, but it's not going to eat up all of it. So hopefully in the out years, we get a little bit more flexibility than we had this year. We fully funded our retiree health care obligations for this year. We did dip into OPEB for FY19 in order to deal with the revenue challenge that we were visited with a couple of weeks ago. But rather than making that an ongoing visit to OPEB, we went right back in and made sure this year's budget addressed the OPEB funding. So we're making our funding for this year's OPEB, and as I said, we addressed some of the chronic underfunding of our budgets. And also a commitment that I made, and many of the council members who were campaigning when I was campaigning made, there is no tax increase. And so anybody who's waiting for me to drop the tax increase bomb, you will be sorely disappointed. I will say that I go to audiences and I tell them that we're not doing a tax increase, and I do talk to people who say, please raise my taxes. But I also recognize that is not the countywide sentiment. And in my heart of hearts, I would spend what I needed to spend, But I also recognize that if people aren't ready and don't believe that you need the resources, we need to do a better job of showing people we need to do that. And part of what we're going to do long-term in terms of looking at restructuring is do everything we can to bring the cost of county government down to what I think they should be. And I do think they should be less than they are right now for what we're doing. But at the same time, be able to make the case that after having done everything we could do to make this more responsible, that we may need, it's possible, we may need additional revenues to address some of the unmet needs that people continue to identify. But I recognize that I'm working in a climate where people have limited faith in government. I don't know if it's little, but certainly limited, and limited trust in, that government spends your dollars well. And I feel our first job is to make sure that we can convince people that we're spending their dollars as well as we possibly can, and that we're going to be good stewards going forward. So when I was campaigning, I made very few promises because I knew there wasn't any money. So I kept saying I don't want to propose a Christmas tree because I know I can't deliver a Christmas tree. So a couple of things that I wanted to do and I prioritized, one of them was the early child care education fund. And we're putting a $7 million down payment into that fund in this budget. And we also knew, and we've had conversations with the folks leading the charge to do this, that we weren't in a position to, even if somebody handed us a lot of money right now, to either find the spaces or have the staff that's trained to fill this. And so part of what we're going to do this year is identify spaces in the county where we can expand childcare, work with park and planning to make sure that if I want to go into a shopping center and help somebody open up a childcare center there, or an early childhood education center there, that we're not going to run into zoning problems in being able to do that, so that we can take advantage of the vacant spaces that exist to help make this possible. And we're going to work to make sure that we've got staff available to staff these new centers. And it's not going to be county staff, obviously, but we want to make it possible that there's a pool of trained and capable people who can step in and do these jobs so we can continue this expansion. $7 million is a down payment. I don't know if there won't be any state delegates in the room, but I want them to know that I appreciate the work that the state is doing on early childhood. They just passed a very, very large tax credit for Maryland residents, which is going to make it easier to afford child care. It doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly helps close the gap between the extraordinary cost of child care and what many people have available to spend. And we know that there's more money coming in the budgets to deal with early childhood education. So that's good news. The other thing we did this week, which isn't a budget item so much, is that we launched our equity initiative. And I'm really happy that we have support of the council and all the institutions in this county really to deal with the racial equity issues that have been raised. And so those programs start this year. We funded public schools above maintenance of effort. It is not a lot above maintenance of effort, but it's a $51 million increase that meets 99.5% of the school board's request. One of the things I wish is that I could do my budgets after Annapolis was finished, because then I would know everything that's coming. Some of my colleagues, they do their budgets in April or later, so they know what the funding is for Annapolis. They can make final adjustments. So we don't know all the puts and takes, but I'm optimistic that actually the school situation for everybody in Maryland, but also in Montgomery County, is going to get better, because they are looking at making serious investments in the Kerwin report. They are looking at adding revenues, which is crucial, because if you don't add revenues, they're going to just redivide the pie. And if they only redivide the pie, Montgomery County is not likely to do very well in that equation. So we need more revenues thrown into this pie. But I'm encouraged that the state is taking this seriously, and they're moving forward on that. And also, I believe we'll be seeing more capital funding. And that's absolutely crucial. We have an $800 million gap in capacity projects. We've got an $800 million gap in renovations. The combination of the money that'll come from the state will not fill that gap, but it will make a significant contribution toward filling that gap. And so I'm really happy about that. I've been in Annapolis a lot. This week I've been down there 3 times. I've spent a lot of time there because I know that's something people told me was important for the county executive to do. And so I go there and I go where people tell me to go. I figured people know Annapolis better than I do, and my job is to, visit the people that, the folks who are doing business down there feel are important to visit. I've met with the governor once. I've met with the governor's staff on a number of issues. We are of different parties. We have somewhat different beliefs, but there are overlaps in our agendas and the things we're going to try to accomplish. And they are a source of money, and they're a source of support. And so I will work with anybody who can provide money and support and has agenda items that are similar to my agenda items and the county's agenda items. So I've been really happy to be down there, and I think it's been productive. We're going to work with school systems to make sure that we continue to advocate effectively in Annapolis. In the budget you will see money for the implementation of the flash service on Route 29. It's not full BRT, but it's not a bus stuck in traffic as badly as buses are currently stuck in traffic. When we get dedicated lanes, then we're going to put the BRT name on things. But I've resisted the temptation to call everything BRT because I don't want to disappoint people and provide something that isn't BRT, knowing that it's not BRT, but just simply slapping a name on a bus. So it's flash. It will improve service in that corridor. And as we continue to make improvements in that corridor, it will elevate itself. We're also starting on 355, planning for that. I've got money looking at planning improvements also on 355 for the road network north of Gaithersburg. I feel the residents in the Up County are truly right when they say they're stranded. I've not been a fan of M83, but there are other ways to solve their problems, and we have an obligation to solve the problem. And for me, that's the important thing. There may be different solutions than people thought originally, and I think there are, and we're going to move forward with that. And finally, in the spirit of collaboration, we did not spend every dollar in the budget. We have given the county council $10 million, and that $10 million can go to priorities that the council members feel the $10 million should go to. I could have spent it all, and I won't give you the list of what I would have spent it on, but you could imagine the things I would have increased if I could have done it. But I felt that, having been on the other side of the street for 12 years, what happens is the council knows this is ultimately their budget. It really is ultimately their budget. And they're free to make changes, but if the executive spends down every single dollar that you hand people, the only way they put a stamp on a budget is by cutting things out and then adding things. And I thought, well, rather than forcing people as the first step of, I want to put my fingerprints here, rather than forcing them to figure out where they want to cut and then where are they going to shift it, it's like, here's $10 million. If there are things we didn't fully address, please take that money and fully address them. I've got my list. If they ask me for suggestions, I'll tell them what they are, but that would not be in the spirit of handing them the money, and I don't want to put them on a spot, but I absolutely believe that, that they should use the money wisely, and I think there are wise uses of that money. And, and I could have solved some of the criticism I know I'm going to get if I had simply spent it, but then they would have had no money to spend themselves. So hopefully we all get to the right place on this and people will be happy at the end of the day. So other things I want to talk about. In the environmental goals, we are purchasing 10 electric ride-on buses. We're expanding our efforts to convert street lights to LEDs. DGS has continued to put solar panels on buildings, and I want to see a lot more solar panels. I would like to see for the first time buildings designed by the county to be zero energy. I watch the private sector do it. It's embarrassing when the private sector does it and we don't. We need to start doing that. We are going to begin or augment a food waste pilot. We're putting another on. I'm sorry, this is residue of a cold and talking too much for the last several weeks. So we're putting about another $500,000 into a food scrap program. We want to increase and get into recovery of food waste. This is the biggest piece of the recovery stream we're not getting. I've told people that my goal is to shut the incinerator down. To shut the incinerator down and not dump all this stuff on some poor black community in Virginia, we have to step up our recycling. And you can't do this without the change in the food recycling. So we're going into food recycling. We're going to expand our efforts in both commercial and apartment areas. And we're actually looking at retooling our current recycling facility. We're looking at options that may include a different facility, a reconfiguration of our current facility. We know we're not doing everything we can do, and so we're going to push more on doing that. And I'm pushing very hard to look at monetizing our waste, sort of a waste to cash program. Other jurisdictions do this, and we need to think about what other jurisdictions are doing. We need to learn, and if I have to learn from Europeans, then we learn from Europeans, but there are people doing things that we don't do. One thing is you're going to find in me is I'm not Montgomery County centric. I don't think all good ideas start here. I don't think we are the repository of anything worth doing. There are other people who are equally committed to a more just, more sustainable society, perhaps more so than us, and we need to open up our eyes and see what other people are doing, and we intend to learn from others and do a better job of doing this. So my goal of getting to shutting down the incinerator is going to depend on our doing a much better job of recycling, and I'm really happy that I have Adam Ortiz, who is available from Prince George's County and actually has a commitment to these kind of issues so we can make progress on our climate goals. Economic growth. We are going to take back some of the economic growth initiative. When we created the Economic Development Corporation, we kind of stripped down everything the county did. And so we're not players as a county. And when I talked to people when I was campaigning and after I was campaigning, they would regale me with stories about how they were courted by people from Fairfax and Prince George's County in these meetings, and they never saw anybody from Montgomery County. And so they're seeing me, but that's not enough. And so I've told my staff that they need to start sending economic development people out with me. When I go to places where I know there are going to be a lot of business people, I want people from economic development with me so that not only do I hand somebody my card and say, I want you to come here, but I can hand them off to somebody from the Economic Development Department, and they can tell them that we want them here and begin talking to them about how we're going to get them here. I am not pessimistic about our ability to bring new businesses to Montgomery County. I've got to say, you know, in my traveling around, I was surprised, given all the negativity about the county, about how many people asked me, what can you do to get me there? And if I've got people asking me, what's the entry to Montgomery County, I feel pretty optimistic that we can provide a road forward for people to come here. Our problem in this county is empty buildings. We don't lack for zoning. We've zoned the bejesus out of the place, but the stuff sits empty and it sits unbuilt. We have 11 million square feet in Class A and Class B that's not occupied. It's the same number that it's been. We need to get serious about figuring out how we fill this space. I'm really serious about figuring out how we fill this space. If you're going to deal with the limitations in this budget in the long term, you have to do a better job of not only running the county better, but you've got to start identifying other sources of revenue, and we're going to work really hard to make sure we grow the tax base in this county, and I think we can succeed in doing that. We've put money into a food kitchen incubator, and the beauty of this project, it's not just an incubator for restaurants, it actually provides job training for people who want to get into the food industry. And I'm not talking about training you to wait tables and wash dishes, but people who learn how to cook and how to do all the work that it takes to actually open up a restaurant and do the work. And I'm hoping that we can do multiple of these projects. One of the companies that does them, and there are multiple companies that do them, they're actually talking about more than one project in this county. I want to do as many as possible. We've put money into a small business assistance program, particularly to help those businesses in Wheaton who've been adversely impacted by our construction up there. And we've had another $150,000 for other adversely impacted businesses. I think the county's got to own the mess it makes. And if I do a project and I wind up tearing up streets and taking away people's parking and jeopardizing businesses, it's on us to help these people become whole. You just can't tell people, tighten your belts, live with it, and hopefully 2 years later, you'll still be standing and everything will be fine. So we need to be more responsible of what we do, and we've got $550,000 to fund previous economic development agreements. We're supporting the creation of Biomanufacturing Industry Center. Biomanufacturing is something I think that this county can get into. Everything doesn't have to go to Frederick. And United Therapeutics in Silver Spring is a great example of a company that can do manufacturing. And they're also an example that you don't have to be horizontal, you can be vertical. And Martine talks about that she was told she could never build a vertical manufacturing facility. And Martine is proof that you can build a vertical manufacturing facility. And so I'm hoping that, we can get into biomanufacturing. We're going to be active in building an incubator network in this county. Our incubators are pretty lame, I'll be frank. They don't do what they should do. They don't cover the robust nature of an economy. And so I want incubators that actually fire on all cylinders. I want to be in the light industrial space. I want to be able to help people who want to start small businesses. We've talked about, the biggest problem in Montgomery County, and the thing Amazon would not save us from, is the empty spaces in shopping centers and the office buildings with the signs 2,000 feet available, 1,000 feet available. We need an economic strategy that helps encourage entrepreneurs to take the small spaces in Montgomery County. We've got to rethink this over-reliance, and can you land the big fish when we've got plenty of people here who are prepared to go to work, who are getting trained, and we're going to put this front and center. I had a meeting with the folks in Montgomery College on the non-credit side. I was blown away at the resources they have and the work they do. And I was kind of stunned that after all the time I spent on the council, this is something that's kind of like a hidden gem. And so their work is going to be integrated into the work we do. There's no point in reinventing an entire wheel when you've got, really important components of it sitting right here in Montgomery County. So we're going to, emphasize working with them. We're going to continue to support funding for, I'll just say, workplace development. We're going to make sure that we do job training the way we're supposed to do job training. I know I see heads shaking in the audience. The elephant in the room. We're not doing what we're supposed to do with job training. I know it, you know it. We're going to change that. And we're going to do whatever, the operative word, whatever it takes to change that so that we actually have a functioning job training program in the county. And that's a very high priority, and we're going to be on that very, very soon. And we're going to continue our support for the Economic Development Corporation and help them to continue to expand their reach. And I was very happy to see that they were actually at the South by Southwest conference for the first time. Seeing them going out and getting into places where people are looking to be courted is like not rocket science, and it's really good they discovered that they can do this. And so I want them doing more of it, and I expect the county to do more of it. We're going to do more work on affordable housing. We've got $63 million invested in affordable housing in this budget. There'll be a little bit more that comes in mid-year when we get a repayment of outstanding loans, so we're going to be north of the $64 million mark. We're funding $41 million in the Montgomery Housing Initiative. It's an additional $21.77 million is going into these programs, and we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. We already identified 2 sites that we're working on for affordable housing. There are 2 other sites that I've talked to people about in order to put affordable housing on them. I'm interested in different models. I would like to find ways not to get the scraps on the table, like a small percentage of whatever gets built. I want to find ways to get a higher percentage of what's built, and I don't want to give away the store to get it. And we're going to be serious. We're going to find partners who want to work with us on terms that make us more effective and get us the product we need and do it more effectively. And overall, we're starting a program with seniors to help pair up seniors for senior housing, identify people who've got a house and would like a roommate, and maybe another senior who would like to live with somebody and is having a hard time finding a place of their own. So we're going to try to match people together so we can help seniors find housing. We're doing a greater investment in tenants' rights. So you see us increasing inspections. We're going to make it very clear we intend to have the buildings in this county brought up to code sooner than later, kept at code. So, and I think that when people get used to it, they'll then go back to a more, a more normal regime of inspection. I shouldn't have to go inspect everybody every 6 months to do the right thing. It's not in my interest, it's not in their interest to do that. Hopefully we'll both understand what the expectations are, and we'll get improvements in that. We're filling vacant positions to implement the recent MPDU requirements, and we're going to be modernizing the MPDU program. I've talked to too many people who tell me that it's very, very hard to find out what's available. And then they can't manage to arrive on the scene in time in order to get it. And so we're going to make sure that we do a better job of letting our residents know when MPDUs become available.